Disney Imagineer, Asa Kalama. I'm one of the people who design and build all the cool Disney theme park attractions, like the one going on right here. The Fast and Furious Lights, Motors, Action Extreme Stunt Show at Disney's Hollywood Studios. It's an engine-revving, tire-squealing, intense stunt spectacular that thrusts guests right into the middle of an action-packed film shoot. But I know what you're thinking. What does an extreme stunt show like Lights, Motors, Action have to do with science? Well, lots. See, as Disney Imagineers, we use science to tell stories, to take you to exciting places. And when you start thinking like an Imagineer, you're gonna find that science is really a lot like this. Get ready to put the pedal to the metal, because we're driving full throttle into the world of imagination, inspiration, and science. As we dream it, do it. The science of Imagineers. Yep, science isn't just fun. Whoa! Well, howdy, partners. Welcome to Asa's Old West Soda Saloon, where you can wet your whistle with the rootinest, tootinest root beer and these here parts. Actually, it's my workspace here at Walt Disney Imagineering Research and Development, the place where imagination meets engineering. But as you can see, I'm really excited about a fun new idea I came up with for one of my favorite Frontierland attractions, Disneyland's The Golden Horseshoe. Yep, the Golden Horseshoe is all about fun food and wild frontier-themed entertainment that's great for the whole family. But I was thinking, instead of just handing beverages to our guests, why not continue that frontiersy theming and excitement with a little Old West bar sliding beverage fun? Let's say a guest is really thirsty.
Hey, I'm a really thirsty guest.
And let's pretend that this mug is full of icy cold root beer. No problem, sir. Here comes your root beer.
I could get closer.
Well, I'm still working out some of the kinks. See, this kind of Wild West drink sliding, or any kind of sliding, can't be done without first looking at the science of friction. Friction is the force that opposes the motion of an object that wants to rub or slide against another object. And believe it or not, the study of friction is actually called tribology. Now, whether the movement-resisting force of friction is a bad thing or a good thing really depends on what you're trying to do with friction. For example, friction between your feet and the ground can be a pretty good thing. It keeps your feet from slipping out from under you when you're trying to walk, or run, or jump. Friction keeps your hands from slipping when you're doing things like swinging on a rope, or gripping the monkey bars, or catching a monkey. And it's because of the friction between the strings of a violin and the bow that rubs against them that you get to hear me play. Okay, so maybe that's not such a good thing. The point is, friction really is everywhere and anywhere something is sliding or wants to slide on something else. But what, you might ask, causes this movement-resisting, sometimes helpful, sometimes not so helpful force between surfaces? To see that, we'll need to use Super Micro Shrinker Vision. Okay, it's really just a special effect, but try to play along anyway. Here, you gotta put these on. Cool, huh? But we're not quite small enough yet. Let's keep going. Check it out. You're seeing a microscopic representation of where the surface of the glass actually meets the surface of the bar. These mountain-like peaks are called asperities. See, whenever two surfaces are in contact with each other, there are actually tiny individual points of contact on each surface where the asperities touch. And as two surfaces rub or slide against each other, it's at these points of contact that friction is happening. And when we take an even closer look, excuse me, Yeti, those aren't mountains. What are you doing here? Well, as long as you're here, I could use some help with the animation. Sound cool? Let's take an even closer look at the cause of friction. Atoms. Let's say we've got two surfaces, one red one blue, that are sliding against each other. And that each of these little yetis represents the many, many tiny atoms at each contact point. Whenever and wherever contact points touch, the atoms start touching too. It's the touching of atoms at these contact points that actually causes the movement-resisting force of friction. Now, as you might imagine, the more the surfaces press on each other, the more contact points you get, which means more atoms start touching each other, and that means more friction, more resistance to movement. In fact, it's proportional. Twice the force, you get twice the friction. 3 times the force, 3 times the friction, and so on. And get this, in some cases, depending on the surface material, the atoms actually stick to each other momentarily. This is called adhesion, which is an electric attraction, and it too contributes to friction. No, guys, you're supposed to be sticking, not dancing. Guys, we're talking about friction. Guys? So, no matter what size surfaces you're dealing with, friction, that resistance you feel, is really about contact points and atoms touching. Just remember, fewer contact points means fewer atoms touching and less friction, which is why it's much easier to slide an empty box than it is to slide the same size box filled with heavy stuff. It presses down harder, so there are more contact points with the surface it's sliding on, more atoms touching each other, and more friction you have to fight against. Whoa. What's going on up there?
Oops. Sorry, Asa. I was wondering where you were. Want a cookie?
I think it's time to return to full size. Hey, Josh, can you take the glasses off the camera?
Sure.
Hey, Josh, we've been having some fun with friction.
Ah, tribology. So how's it going?
Well, the friction that's got me stuck is the stuff that's not letting me slide a glass mug of root beer down this long wooden bar.
Well, maybe you can find the answer in some of the other ways that we Imagineers use friction.
Sounds like a good idea to me. Come on, let's go take a look. Thanks, Josh. I'll see you later.
You know, a mug of root beer does sound good.
It sure does.
Here's a riddle for you. What's almost as long as the Eiffel Tower is tall? As wide as an 8-lane highway? Weighs over 83,000 tons and is loaded with Disney fun? Do you wonder? It's the Disney Wonder. It's one of our spectacular Disney cruise ships. But as you can imagine, whenever something this big slides through the water, there's bound to be some friction. Because yes, friction applies to fluids too. Whenever anything moves through the water, it's gonna experience drag. Drag is the resistant force due to an object's shape or surface properties. Drag is what you feel when trying to push water out of the way, like trying to walk quickly through a swimming pool. It's hard work and takes a lot of energy. Skin friction is a type of drag. It's caused by the stickiness of water molecules as they rub against and stick to solid surfaces and each other. To reduce drag, we designed the shape of the Disney Wonder's hull to be hydrodynamic, or streamlined. That means it has less surface, so it can literally part the water as it moves through it. Less resistance from drag means less energy is needed to move the Wonder through the water. So you get better fuel efficiency and higher speeds, so guests can get to those exciting destinations quicker. We also reduce skin friction. Both the Wonder and her sister ship, the Disney Magic, made history by being the first cruise line to use an innovative hull coating. It's 100% non-toxic and environmentally friendly, and incredibly effective in reducing friction on the hull. So here, reducing friction is the name of the game. And speaking of games, here on the wide world of Sports Deck, there are plenty of games you can play thanks to friction. Yes, it's the force of friction that allows you to grip and shoot a basketball.
Ah, tribology.
And it's friction that helps your foot stick to a soccer ball when you go to kick it into the net. But there are actually two common forces of friction at work whenever a surface is in contact with another surface. And the best way to show them to you is through the ancient and fiercely competitive sport of shuffleboard.
You're going down.
Do I hear a challenge? To get something moving, Newton's first law tells us that you have to apply a force, and that's where you encounter static friction. Static friction is the resisting force you've got to overcome to get an object moving. It's like the last time you tried to push something really heavy. Remember how hard it was to get it moving? Static friction is the force that was pushing back and resisting your effort.
What do you have in here? Bricks?
Well, once you've provided enough force to overcome the static friction, that's when you've encountered kinetic friction. Kinetic friction is the force that must be overcome to keep an object sliding over another object. Oh, I get it. Shuffleboard is all about applying the principles of these two frictional forces, static and kinetic, as the disc slides across the surface of the court. To get the disc moving, you've got to apply enough force to overcome the static friction. Once the disc is moving, you apply a force greater than the kinetic friction to keep the disc moving with your cue. Once you launch your disc down the court, there's no more applied force coming from your cue. The kinetic friction that's resisting the disc's movement slowly brings it to a stop, and hopefully in the high score zone. You know, I have played this game a few times before in my life. Your turn.
Yes!
Very clever. Using the force of your disc to overcome the static friction of my resting disc to make it slide off the court. Apparently, I'm not the only one who's played before. Wow, you are good. What's your secret?
You gotta eat right, train hard, get plenty of rest, and make sure you know a thing or two about tribology.
And here's something else about tribology that you've probably experienced for yourself. Ever notice that when you go to move something, it always feels like you need more force to get it moving than to keep it moving? That's because it does. The force of static friction is actually greater than the force of kinetic friction.
That's true, but I could still use a hand moving your stuff.
So we saw a little earlier how the friction from water can slow the movement of a ship. But did you know we can use water to reduce the force of friction? To make things go faster? Here at Slush Gusher at Walt Disney World's Blizzard Beach, that's exactly what we're doing. Slush Gusher is an exciting high-speed 90-foot-tall water slide that zips guests straight down and over a wild up and down double dip. Now, as with most slides, gravity is the key. You start way up high and let gravity be the force that overcomes the kinetic friction between you and the slide. So, why do we need water? Well, for one, water is fun, and two, without it, you wouldn't go very far. When you stick, it's because the force of gravity isn't strong enough to overcome the static friction that's holding you in place. Can I get a hand here, guys? Anybody? So here on Slush Gusher, we use water as a lubricant. A lubricant is something you use between two sliding surfaces in an effort to reduce friction by reducing the number of contact points. Water is a very incompressible fluid, and although it can be a tough fluid to move through, it's a great fluid to slide over. Which is exactly what you're doing when you ice skate. There's a thin layer of water that acts as a lubricant between your skates and the ice, so there are fewer contact points and less friction. So by pumping water up to the top of Slush Gusher, guests actually ride down on a thin layer of water, a lubricant. It reduces the static friction so they can get going, and the kinetic friction so they can keep moving. The result? Fewer contact points between you and the slide, less friction, and the super slick speed our guests are looking for. Like this. At the bottom of the slide, we splash down in a pool of deeper water, where we use friction to our advantage. It slows our guests to a fun and splashy stop. And I gotta tell you, the slide with reduced friction and the stop with increased friction are both a lot of fun.
And speaking of fun, how about driving your very own race car on a mile-long track at speeds of up to 120 miles per hour at the Richard Petty driving experience at the Walt Disney World Resort?
This is Disney Imagineer Derek Howard. So, there's a lot of friction going on with these cars here. Both good friction and not so good friction.
When it comes to motors and engines, friction can be a pretty bad thing. If all the mechanical parts aren't sliding and rotating together smoothly, you've got the potential for grinding and rubbing that breaks down the surfaces. We call that abrasion, and it can definitely wear your parts out quicker. And here's a good example of how friction and abrasion can really destroy your parts, as we see here with this blown piston and piston rod. And of course, there's the issue of heat.
The force of friction changes the energy of motion into heat as the atoms at each contact point bump into and off of each other. Ow, ow, ow. If you've ever gotten a rope burn, you know exactly what I mean. Ow, ow, ow. Now, when you're cold, you rub your hands together to warm them up. So sometimes heat from friction can be good. Why is frictional heat in a machine so bad?
Well, excessive heat, besides being uncomfortable to be around, can actually make parts fracture or bend, and so your machine fails. And whenever friction increases, you get a decrease in your machine's efficiency as energy goes into fighting that resistance to movement. Heat is wasted energy that just floats away. So when we design motors or engines or any gadgets or gizmos with moving parts, we try to reduce friction so things slide and move as easily as possible. Where friction does remain, we use oil and other lubricants to reduce the resistance between the surfaces.
And that helps keep things running smoothly. Literally.
That's so cool. We know that sliding causes a lot of friction, and you can reduce that friction with a lubricant. But there's also another way to reduce friction and make it easier to move one surface over another. Let's roll. Yep, rolling is much easier than sliding. But even when it comes to rolling, you can't escape friction. So whenever there are wheels rolling, there's rolling friction.
That's right. Rolling friction is the force that resists the rotation of a wheel because the wheel or ground actually deform when the two come in contact with each other.
Now, although rolling friction is less than static and kinetic friction, which is why it's easier to roll than slide, it's still a frictional force that resists movement.
Absolutely. These cars ride on rubber tires, which are pretty soft and tend to deform easily when they're on a hard surface. As the car rolls along, the deformation in each tire is like a bump right out there in front where the tire meets the ground. So as each tire rotates, it's as if it's pushing that bump along the entire way. That resistance takes energy away in the form of heat as the atoms compress and expand in the tire. You can actually see how easily rubber tires deform when you watch them rotating in super slow motion. But friction still takes its toll and will eventually break down these tires.
Whoa! Friction at work.
If you've ever ridden your bicycle with pretty flat tires, you know how hard it is to pedal. That's the rolling friction, the deformation of the tires that you're using all of your energy to overcome.
Ah, tribology.
Hey, do any of you guys have a pump?
Fast and furious friction.
I know there's one place here at the Richard Petty Driving Experience where we really want friction and use it to our advantage, right?
Exactly. Just as we need rolling friction to make the cars move, we also need friction to make the cars stop.
Ah, brakes.
As the brake pad squeezes onto the spinning brake disc, the kinetic friction between the two resists that spinning by converting the energy of motion into heat. And that brings the wheels to a stop.
Yes, science is everywhere. When it comes to wheels, the general rule is the softer the tire, the more rolling friction and resistance to movement there is. This is Amber Samville. So why don't we just use harder tires and wheels on all of our vehicles? There'd be less deformation, less rolling friction, right?
You're absolutely right. Here on Walt Disney World's Steam Train, we use very hard steel wheels on steel tracks. There's very little wheel deformation and little rolling friction. That's why trains are so good at carrying heavy loads. With less deformation, you need less energy to turn the wheels. So you can transport heavy loads long distances using less fuel. But there's a trade-off with harder wheels. The less deformation there is, the fewer contact points the wheel has with the surface it's on. And that means there's less static friction.
All powered wheels need at least some static friction between them and the surface they're on to keep them from slipping.
Right. On a train wheel, the contact area is only about a penny wide. So on many trains, when they first go to power the wheels, or when they're climbing a hill, there's not much static friction between the wheels and the track, and sometimes the wheels slip. Those trains actually apply sand to the track. The sand gives the wheels and the track a new surface with higher static friction. That static friction is greater than the force rotating the wheels, so the wheels stick to the track much better.
That's friction at work. What about roller coasters? Big Thunder Mountain Railroad is a perfect example of how rolling wheels can zip a vehicle along at super fast speeds. But from the very first moment the roller coaster starts to coast, rolling friction is trying to slow us down, isn't it?
Yes, that's a big challenge when designing a coaster. The vehicle isn't powered. It's literally coasting as gravity pulls it down and around through the twists and turns, hills and drops. Even though we try to reduce rolling friction by using very hard steel wheels coated in urethane, there's always some rolling friction whenever wheels roll. There's also rolling friction in the wheel bearings. So we have to carefully calculate how much rolling friction there is to make sure it doesn't take out too much thrill or even stop you before you get to the next lift hill.
And there's also quite a lot of friction coming from the air, isn't there?
Yes, air is a fluid. Just like a ship moving through water, a coaster experiences drag from the air it moves through.
So whenever we design our roller coasters, we have to balance our theming and the story we're trying to tell with making the coaster as streamlined as possible. You know, a little more rolling friction right now might not be such a bad thing. So what did we learn about friction today? Well, we learned that whenever two surfaces want to rub or slide against each other, friction is the force that resists that movement, and that contact points and touching atoms are the source of that friction and heat. Static friction is the force that must be overcome to get something sliding. And kinetic friction is the force you've got to overcome to keep something sliding. Rolling friction is a unique friction that causes resistance in rolling wheels and other round objects through deformation. And that works to slow them down. And sometimes friction can work for us or against us, depending on what we're trying to do. And speaking of working for us, check this out. Since rolling is easier than sliding, how about we try a rolling root beer mug? All aboard the Root Beer Express!
Is this gonna work?
I'm absolutely not sure. Asa! Well, while I sit here spinning my wheels, there's one more attraction I want to show you today. And funny, there's spinning wheels involved there too. When it comes to intense vehicle stunts and pulse-pounding chase scenes, Hollywood Studios' Lights, Motors, Action Extreme Stunt Show here at Walt Disney World has it all. And yes, static, kinetic, and rolling friction are all over this attraction. This is Janet Hu. Why is understanding friction so important to an attraction like this?
Well, we always knew that we wanted our stunt show to mirror the classic Hollywood car chase. So that meant lots of cars speeding around through some very tight spaces and around tight corners. Lots of special choreographed moves.
One of the first things you notice is that there's a lot of high-speed wheel spinning going on. What's happening there?
We use very powerful motorcycle engines in the cars, so you've still got lots of power, but they're much, much lighter than regular car engines. Lighter cars means less pressure between the surface of the tires and the asphalt, so less friction. Whenever tires spin or slip, it's because that high power going into rotating the wheels has overcome the friction that's supposed to be holding them to the ground. Once the tires are spinning, the kinetic friction from the asphalt resists the rubbing of the spinning tires. You get lots of heat and smoke, that burning rubber squealing effect.
So, unlike conventional driving, for a lot of your stunts, you actually want to overcome the friction that's holding the tires to the ground.
That's right. We do something called drifting, where the car actually slides over the surface of the asphalt. At high speeds, the driver turns the steering wheel and uses the sideways force on the back of the car to break the rear tires free of the friction. As the rear tires slide sideways against the force of the kinetic friction, the driver turns the steering wheel to the outside of the curve and drifts the car through a very sharp turn.
And what about when you've got a car speeding one way, then it suddenly spins completely around to face the other direction?
We call those 180s. It's like drifting, but this time we turn the steering wheel into the turn to slide the rear of the car completely around. If we have enough force, we can keep that spinning going, overcoming friction to do a full 360-degree turn, and so on.
And of course, there's rolling friction in this show because there's wheels rolling on every vehicle. When it comes to a stunt show like this, what's the most important thing to keep in mind?
Well, first, that our drivers are all trained stunt people. No one should ever try any of these or other car stunts at home. And of course, it does help to know a little bit about tribology.
And I'll bet after a wild show like that, your stunt drivers could all use an ice-cold mug of root beer. Oh, wait, that's it! The key to sliding the glass mug down the counter is the icy cold part. See, the icy coldness of the mug and the root beer cause these little water droplets of condensation on the side and bottom of the mug. And that's the lubricant we need to overcome the kinetic friction between the mug and the bar. As the mug slides down the bar, the water should begin sticking to the bar. That should leave less and less lubricant on the mug until the kinetic friction overcomes the force I've applied, bringing the mug to a stop. Sir, here comes your icy cold root beer.
Hooray! Now, if I can only open my mouth.
I hope you'll remember that everything starts with an idea. If you follow through with your ideas, science can be the means to turn them into reality. As we say at Imagineering, dream it, do it. Now that's good root beer.